Millionaire leaves pregnant wife for mistress, but she was hiding a secret that changes everything. In a quiet suburb of Charleston, the wealthy magnate James Blackwood seemed to have it all: a thriving business empire, a palatial home, and a beautiful wife named Caroline. Yet beneath the shimmering veneer of success lay a marriage teetering on the brink. In a single night, James shattered the illusion of their once perfect union when he confessed he was leaving Caroline for a stunning woman named Vanessa, his longtime mistress. Broken-hearted and blind-sided, Caroline braced herself for the fallout. Little did James know, however, that Vanessa was harboring a shocking secret, a hidden truth that would upend all their lives forever. Caroline Montgomery Blackwood was born into a modest family in Greenville, South Carolina. She was the daughter of a high school teacher and a retired nurse, both of whom instilled in her the values of compassion, integrity, and resilience. She carried these traits with her when she moved to Charleston in her early 20s, determined to make something of herself. That was when she first met James Blackwood, a man whose very presence could light up a room with sheer confidence. He was older, already wealthy from a series of real estate ventures that propelled him to local fame, and possessed a magnetic charm that drew Caroline in from the start. At the beginning of their relationship, Caroline found James's ambition intoxicating. He had a way of making the impossible seem easy, dreaming aloud of building an empire that would rival the biggest names in the country. In return, James found Caroline's warm spirit and unwavering support a welcome refuge from the cutthroat negotiations and corporate posturing he faced every day. They fit together like two puzzle pieces, one bold and visionary, the other empathetic and steadying. The synergy of their union was undeniable, and it didn't take long for them to marry in a lavish ceremony overlooking the harbor. Life after the wedding was a whirlwind of business deals and social galas. Caroline found herself the graceful hostess of James's many parties, forging connections with the city's elite. Yet beneath the glitter, she couldn't help but notice the toll that James's never-ending aspirations placed on their relationship. He traveled often. He came home later and later, or sometimes not at all. When Caroline confronted him, James would dismiss her concerns with a reassuring smile, telling her that every sacrifice was for their future. And for a while, that answer worked. Caroline trusted him, loved him enough to let her doubts remain unvoiced. Things began to shift when Caroline suspected James was becoming restless, his interest drifting. He started showing more signs of dissatisfaction at home, small criticisms, a certain impatience when she spoke about her day, a reluctance to talk about the future unless it involved business. Then there was his phone, which he guarded with an intensity that made Caroline's stomach churn with suspicion. Late-night texts, hushed phone calls, business trips extended for days without explanation, her mind buzzed with possibilities, each darker than the last. Caroline tried to talk to him, but each conversation ended in evasion. James would deflect with claims of new clients or last-minute negotiations that absolutely couldn't wait. He grew distant, almost cold, as if home life had lost its luster for him. In many ways, he was already gone before the confession, before the heartbreak, before the raw devastation that was about to unfold. Caroline never imagined that a few hours later, on a night that began like any other, James would walk through their ornate front doors, take her trembling hands in his, and utter those fateful words, "I'm leaving you." The initial shock left Caroline speechless. Her palms went clammy, her heart thundered against her ribs, and she felt an inexplicable cold creep into her bones. James's voice echoed in her ears, "I'm leaving you," but the words didn't quite sink in. She stared at him, searching for the gentleness she once loved, hoping to find some trace of remorse or doubt. Instead, she saw only steely resolve, He explained he'd fallen in love with another woman, Vanessa Carter, and though he had planned a more gentle revelation, he couldn't stomach living the lie any longer. Caroline wished she could put a face to this name Vanessa. The only clues she had were scattered comments James once made about a brilliant marketing consultant he'd hired to revamp his real estate firm's public image. Caroline recalled one particular evening at a corporate gala when James introduced her to Vanessa. At the time, the name was fleeting, overshadowed by a swirl of introductions. Vanessa was a tall woman with striking features, honey brown hair swept into a sophisticated chignon, piercing grey eyes, and a captivating confidence. Caroline remembered her feeling slightly uneasy that night, but she dismissed it as mere self-consciousness. Now, all the pieces fit together in a puzzle that only spelled betrayal. Although she was crushed, Caroline found a glimmer of courage deep within. The next morning, she hired a private investigator named Mark Stevenson, a seasoned professional recommended by a friend who had gone through a similarly devastating divorce. If James was leaving, Caroline wanted to know what she was up against. Part of her felt guilty for stooping to secrecy, but she told herself this was self-preservation. After all, James had shattered their vows. The least she could do was protect herself. As Mark started digging, Caroline pored over bank statements and financial records. She discovered that James had been funneling money into a secret account for months, perhaps even years. She found suspicious cash withdrawals, hotel receipts, and flamboyant purchases she never saw brought into the home. A swirl of questions crowded her mind. Was their entire marriage a sham? How long had James been planning this exit? The house was eerily silent in his absence. She wandered from room to room, occasionally finding reminders of him, a tie slung over the back of a chair, a nearly empty bottle of his cologne in the master bathroom. The smell of him lingered in the air. Every detail was laced with heartbreak, but more than anything, it infuriated her. She promised herself that she wouldn't let him walk away scot-free if that was indeed what he was planning. Soon, Mark emailed her a hefty file. It contained photographs of James and Vanessa at an upscale restaurant, or stepping out of a black limo, or holding hands at a weekend getaway in Hilton Head. The timestamps showed their rendezvous going back nearly 8 months. Caroline stared at the images until her eyes burned. There, in front of her, was incontrovertible proof of her husband's betrayal. Yet for all its painful clarity, it was only the beginning. Unknown to both James and Caroline, Vanessa Carter had her own buried truths, ones that would force them all to confront a reality more shocking than anything they had imagined. While Caroline grappled with the remnants of her life, James was riding the wave of his newfound freedom, reveling in Vanessa's affections. He relocated to a penthouse suite at the Renaissance Hotel, offering panoramic views of Charleston's historic harbor. The move was as much about convenience as it was about flaunting his wealth. He had no intention of hiding his affair any longer. The tabloids got wind of it, running stories with titles like "Real Estate Mogul James Blackwood Splits from Wife," accompanied by speculative commentary on who the mysterious mistress might be. For her part, Vanessa played the role of supportive partner, helping James pivot his real estate brand into new territory. With her marketing expertise, they positioned his firm for explosive growth across the southeastern region. They were photographed at high society functions, arms intertwined, the glimmer of success sparking in their eyes. James felt invincible. He had money, influence, and a mesmerizing woman on his arm. In his mind, the world was at his feet. Yet, behind Vanessa's polished exterior lingered an anxiety she couldn't shake. She spent hours on the phone with someone whose number she never saved under a real name, always stepping out on the terrace to ensure James wouldn't overhear. Sometimes, in the hush of early morning, she would break down in silent tears. James noticed the occasional puffiness around her eyes, but chalked it up to the stress of launching his new marketing campaign. The truth was, that Vanessa was living a double life, a precarious balancing act that threatened to collapse under the slightest pressure. In a hushed meeting at a coffee shop outside the city, Vanessa met with a man named Thomas Carlyle. He was not a business associate, not a relative. He was, in fact, her husband. Their marriage was a secret she had kept from James from the very beginning. Thomas was no millionaire. He was a school administrator in Charlotte, leading a quiet, unassuming life. Their relationship had deteriorated in the past year, especially after Vanessa took on James as a client and frequently traveled between Charlotte and Charleston. Thomas demanded explanations. "When are you coming back? Are we even going to salvage what's left of us?" In desperation, he told her he would file for a legal separation if she didn't end whatever fling she was having. But Vanessa didn't give him a straight answer. Instead, she pleaded for time to solidify her position in James's life, time to secure a windfall that would change her future forever. Thomas was torn between anger and lingering affection. He had never seen his wife so fixated on someone else. Vanessa tried to ease his mind by painting a rosy picture. "I'm doing this for us, for our future," she insisted. But the words rang hollow. She was playing a dangerous game, torn between a stable past and the promise of an extravagant future. With every day that passed, the tension mounted, and she knew it was only a matter of time before her secrets erupted to the surface. Caroline had initially thought that once James left, her heartbreak would be the hardest challenge to face. But the endless legal obstacles soon overshadowed her grief. The divorce proceedings commenced at a furious pace. James's legal team moved swiftly, aiming for a rapid settlement that seemed designed to corner Caroline into an unfavorable deal. They proposed a lump sum payment with strict conditions, including gag orders that would prevent Caroline from discussing the affair publicly. It was a classic power play, silence in exchange for money. Yet Caroline wasn't alone. She had enlisted the services of an astute divorce attorney, Beatrice Langston, known for her fierce advocacy in high-stakes cases. Beatrice advised Caroline that patience was the key. They would not accept any settlement that undermined Caroline's rights, especially after such a betrayal. With Mark Stevenson's investigation steadily unveiling more evidence of James's financial manipulations, Caroline hoped to secure a fair division of property, if not more, given the marital misconduct. Amid the negotiations, Caroline started receiving anonymous letters in her mailbox. The envelopes had no return address, the contents typed on plain paper. At first, she assumed they were from some reporter digging for scandalous material, but the tone was oddly empathetic. "You deserve to know the truth," read one. Another wrote, "She's not who she claims to be." There was also a photograph, a candid snapshot of Vanessa Carter in a tearful embrace with a man Caroline didn't recognize. Intrigued, she handed these letters over to Mark. If someone was trying to send her a message, she intended to follow the lead. Meanwhile, James was oblivious to the shadows forming around him. He was too busy finalizing big real estate deals to notice Vanessa's restlessness or the many calls she stepped out to make. If he ever questioned her absence, she would lean in, brush her lips against his, and promise him it was nothing but work. James, infatuated and overconfident, never doubted her story. He believed he was the apex predator in Charleston's social jungle, certain that everyone else was simply trying to catch up. But the truth was that Vanessa wasn't merely stepping out for clandestine calls with her husband Thomas. She was also in contact with someone named Olivia Pierce, an ambitious tabloid journalist who had built her career exposing the secrets of Charleston's elite. Olivia had a knack for sniffing out salacious stories, and Vanessa was offering her a gold mine on James and, potentially, on the entire Blackwood empire. If Vanessa could spin the narrative in a way that benefited her, perhaps she could secure a massive payoff from James to keep quiet about her own hidden life. The stage was set for a perfect storm. Caroline felt more determined than ever to protect herself and uncover the full extent of James's betrayal. Vanessa was playing both sides, entangled in a web of deception that grew more complex with each passing day. And James, arrogant and unprepared, was about to find out that betrayal cuts both ways, that sometimes the betrayer becomes the betrayed. While Caroline wrestled with the remnants of her marriage, James reveled in the thrill of his newfound freedom. He had moved into a lavish penthouse suite at the Renaissance Hotel, drawn by its sweeping harbor views and social prestige. Ever since admitting he was leaving Caroline, he had immersed himself in his affair with Vanessa, convinced he had traded up for a more dazzling future. Vanessa was more than just his lover. A master of marketing strategy, she orchestrated campaigns that elevated Blackwood Enterprises, posting updates that showcased James's leadership and their shared vision. Together, they navigated Charleston's elite circles like a power couple on the rise, cultivating an image of unshakable unity. Yet behind Vanessa's polished veneer, an unease simmered. She took phone calls in hushed tones and ended them if James approached, her voice taut with urgency. Sometimes she would gaze out from the penthouse balcony, the harbor lights reflected in her troubled eyes. James noticed her pensive moods and occasional forced smiles, but her excuses, client calls, urgent deadlines, business negotiations always seemed plausible enough. Caroline, meanwhile, struggled through an echoing home that felt emptier by the day. The silent rooms were a stark reminder of the life she had once believed invincible. Photographs of happier times only sharpened the ache of James's betrayal. Determined not to be cast aside, she sought help from her lawyer, Beatrice Langston, and a private investigator named Mark Stevenson. In the quiet hours after sunset, they pored over bank statements, payment records, and suspicious receipts that painted an unsettling picture of James's clandestine spending. Each discovery stung. Weekend getaways at charming inns, extravagant jewelry bills, high-priced dinners at exclusive restaurants. Every line item screamed of a carefully concealed affair that ran deeper than Caroline had imagined. It wasn't merely that James had found someone new, he had siphoned off resources they'd once shared, funneling them into a hidden life. If Caroline wanted justice, she needed to act decisively. For James, however, life felt triumphant. Vanessa's marketing genius had won him fresh admiration among Charleston's elite. Newspapers ran stories lauding his vision and ambition, and he hosted lavish parties that only amplified his image as a bold entrepreneur. At these events, Vanessa played the role of elegant partner to perfection, her body language radiating confidence. Together, they accepted congratulatory handshakes and toasts, never betraying a single crack in their carefully curated facade. But as soon as the spotlight dimmed, Vanessa's composure waned. Her phone would buzz, and she'd retreat to secluded corners to speak in urgent, clipped tones. Now and then, James caught snippets. "Give me more time, or I can't do that yet," hints of a second life he couldn't fully comprehend. Whenever he confronted her with mild concern, she'd redirect him with a well-timed smile or a brush of her hand against his arm, lulling him back into complacency. Caroline spent her days and nights analyzing every document Mark brought her. The deeper they dug, the more the numbers told a damning story. Thousands spent on gifts, lavish hotel stays that spanned entire weekends, and inflated consulting fees addressed to Vanessa. While these discoveries pushed Caroline toward despair, they also strengthened her resolve. She was done letting James call the shots. If he was determined to make a spectacle of her loss, she would fight back with facts. Occasionally, Caroline heard whispered rumors that Vanessa might be deceiving James as well. A friend of a friend claimed to have seen Vanessa at a high-end lounge with a man who definitely wasn't James. Another source mentioned seeing them slip into a sleek, unmarked car before driving off. Though Caroline took such stories with a grain of salt, part of her couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction at the possibility. At least James might learn what it was like to be on the receiving end of betrayal. James, for his part, dismissed any hint of Vanessa's possible indiscretions. Whenever the seed of suspicion threatened to sprout, he smothered it with self-assurances that he'd chosen a brilliant, ambitious woman. If she needed secrecy for her deals or marketing strategies, so be it. He told himself he was strong enough, confident enough, to handle any challenge she threw his way. Admitting doubt would mean questioning the entire foundation of his new life. One night, the quiet hush of the penthouse was broken by James's inability to sleep. He padded across the marble floors, intending to grab a glass of water, only to find Vanessa leaning over the balcony railing, phone pressed to her ear. Pale moonlight illuminated her tense features. The moment she saw him, she ended the call, stammering about urgent business. James studied her face, a ripple of uncertainty flickering through him. But when she sank into his arms with an apologetic smile, he allowed himself to believe her. Meanwhile, Caroline took the final steps toward legal confrontation. In Beatrice's law office, the two of them laid out evidence that suggested James had diverted marital assets to Vanessa's personal accounts. Page by page, line by line, the case against James grew stronger. Caroline felt a surge of righteous anger. He hadn't just broken her trust, he had attempted to undermine her financial security. If James thought he could discard her without consequences, he would soon realize how mistaken he was. Despite their differences, James and Caroline were both on converging paths, each propelled by forces they barely understood. James clung to illusions of Vanessa's loyalty, forging forward with grand business plans. Caroline, armed with mounting evidence, prepared for the day she would demand her due. And Vanessa herself loomed as a wild card, her secret phone calls and mysterious behavior threatening to unspool the narrative. Both James and Caroline believed they were living. In quieter moments, even James felt the faint tug of apprehension. He had staked everything on Vanessa, his heart, his reputation, his marriage. Could it be that he had misjudged her? The thought formed like a shadow in the back of his mind, swiftly dismissed before it could grow. He was James Blackwood, a man who prided himself on making the right moves. Doubting Vanessa would mean doubting himself. But storms rarely announce themselves gently. The layers of deceit that had been woven into James's flashy new life would not remain hidden forever. While Charleston's gleaming skyline offered a sense of continuity and grace, the undercurrent of secrets ran too strong to be contained. Each day brought the players in this twisted drama closer to a reckoning none of them could avoid. For Caroline, the battle lines were clear: stand firm, present the evidence, and refuse to be silenced by shame. For James, the future shimmered with promise, so long as he refused to look behind the curtain of Vanessa's perfect facade. And for Vanessa, juggling her various intrigues required increasingly careful maneuvers, lest the entire enterprise collapse under the weight of her own duplicity. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would test their resolve, expose their vulnerabilities, and determine the fate of all three. When the truth finally emerged, it would shatter more than one illusion and forever reshape the landscape of James and Caroline's once shared world. Their choices had led them here now. They had to face the consequences. Over the following weeks, the tension between James and Caroline escalated as divorce proceedings ground on. Beatrice Langston, Caroline's lawyer, was unrelenting, demanding full disclosure of James's assets. James's legal team pushed back, insisting that many of his holdings were independently acquired before the marriage. But the more they argued, the more evidence emerged that contradicted his version of events. The pressure weighed heavily on James, fueling late-night arguments with Vanessa in their penthouse suite. Though James never admitted it aloud, a small voice in the back of his mind questioned whether leaving Caroline so abruptly had been wise. Meanwhile, Caroline and Mark Stevenson worked tirelessly to piece together Vanessa's connections. They discovered that Thomas Carlyle was legally married to Vanessa. The bank transfers showed that James had unknowingly been depositing sums of money into an account managed by Vanessa and Thomas. On paper, these transactions appeared to be for consulting fees, but Mark's investigation revealed that no real consulting took place. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated scheme. Caroline wrestled with the dilemma of how to use this information. She wanted James to see the light that he had abandoned his wife for someone who had no qualms about using him. But she also had to be strategic. If she could present this evidence in court at the right time, it could shift the divorce settlement dramatically. Yet Caroline was torn between her desire for vindication and a lingering sadness over the ruin of her marriage. She couldn't help but remember the early days, when James's eyes sparkled with ambition, and how they once dreamed of traveling the world together. Those memories haunted her, fueling a mix of love and hate she couldn't fully reconcile. Late one evening, as she reviewed a new stack of documents, Caroline received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Olivia Pierce, the tabloid journalist who had been in contact with Vanessa. Caroline's heart pounded in her chest as she answered. Olivia, speaking in a hushed tone, revealed that Vanessa had been feeding her partial truths about James's finances. But Olivia suspected something bigger was at play. Vanessa's story kept changing, and Olivia's instincts told her that Vanessa was concealing crucial details. "I think she's trying to manipulate the press and the courts to her advantage," Olivia said, hinting that she had enough evidence to blow the story wide open. Caroline felt a strange camaraderie with this journalist she had never met. They were both circling the same enigma, trying to understand Vanessa Carter's endgame. Olivia proposed sharing information in exchange for an exclusive angle on the developing scandal. Caroline hesitated. Did she really want to fan these flames in the media? But the truth was, the more that came to light about Vanessa's double dealings, the better chance Caroline had of leveling the playing field against James and his legal powerhouse. She agreed to meet with Olivia in person to explore their options. As she ended the call, Caroline stared at the city lights shimmering outside her window. The lines between ally and adversary blurred in this high-stakes game. With each new revelation, she realized she was only scratching the surface of the deception that ran deeper than she ever imagined. At a discreet diner on the outskirts of Charleston, Caroline finally met Olivia Pierce. The journalist was in her early 30s, with sharp blue eyes and a notebook perpetually at hand. Over cups of coffee that quickly grew cold, Olivia laid out her suspicions. Vanessa had told her that James was a controlling partner, that she was nothing more than a scapegoat for his questionable business practices. Yet the financial documents Olivia had obtained told a different story, one where Vanessa stood to gain significantly, possibly even more than James himself. Caroline felt a sinking dread. This wasn't just about a mistress siphoning money. It hinted at orchestrated fraud, with Vanessa weaving a web of lies around multiple players. Olivia admitted she didn't have all the pieces, but she did have a trove of texts and emails hinting at Vanessa's communications with someone named TC. Caroline's heart leapt at the initials Thomas Carlyle. Vanessa's been playing James and TC off each other, Olivia mused, and I suspect she's been stoking the divorce for her own purposes. If Vanessa timed her revelations to the press perfectly, she could walk away with a massive payday from James, either in hush money or a settlement disguised as a marketing payout. Caroline decided to show Olivia the evidence Mark Stevenson had compiled, the damning bank transfers to T. Carlyle, the private investigator's photographs of Vanessa and Thomas in secret meetings, and the mysterious letters hinting that Vanessa was concealing more than just an affair. Olivia's eyes widened. The puzzle pieces fit together too neatly to be mere coincidence. If we go public with this, it could destroy Vanessa's credibility and, by extension, blow up James's claims in the divorce, Olivia said. But it'll be messy. That was an understatement. Caroline stood at a crossroads. She had spent the better part of her adult life supporting James, building a life she thought was grounded in mutual respect, only to be discarded when a more convenient partner came along. She felt a deep-seated urge for justice or perhaps vengeance. If she exposed Vanessa, James would be forced to confront the magnitude of his own betrayal. But there was no telling how that might influence the final settlement, or how the media frenzy might devour her own privacy. Still, Caroline found strength in the knowledge that she was not the one who had lied or schemed. She only wanted the truth. Before parting, Olivia handed Caroline a business card with a personal number scribbled on the back. "If you want to go on the record, call me," she said. Caroline nodded, grateful yet uneasy. She left the diner with a storm in her heart, uncertain of what her next move should be. That night, she paced in her living room, gazing at the framed photos of happier days with James. She wondered if exposing Vanessa would be a final severing of all ties, a point of no return that would erase any lingering sentiment she felt for her marriage. But perhaps that was precisely what she needed to end the chapter on a note of truth, no matter how painful, and find a path to reclaim her life from the wreckage. While Caroline wrestled with her moral quandary, James's life began to show the first real cracks. His real estate firm, Blackwood Enterprises, faced unexpected hiccups. A major investor pulled out of a lucrative development deal, citing unresolved legal complications. Rumors swirled that James's personal troubles were spilling into his business. To make matters worse, the tabloids had caught wind of his penthouse love nest and were questioning whether it was truly the fairy tale romance he and Vanessa portrayed. Vanessa, meanwhile, doubled down on her role as the doting partner in public. She organized a lavish fundraiser for James's new charitable venture, drumming up glowing press coverage. However, behind closed doors, their relationship grew tense. James sensed that Vanessa was hiding something. She would disappear for hours, return with a forced smile, and deflect his questions with vague excuses about client calls. In fleeting moments of introspection, James found himself missing Caroline, her straightforward warmth, the gentle way she would lay a hand on his shoulder, calming him after a stressful day. But he dismissed these thoughts as remnants of a past he'd already left behind. One afternoon, as James sat in his office scanning over land acquisition proposals, his secretary interrupted him. A man named Thomas Carlyle was in the lobby, insisting he had an urgent matter to discuss. James frowned. The name didn't register, but something about the man's persistence piqued his curiosity, and he agreed to see him. When Thomas stepped into the office, James was struck by the look of desperation in his eyes. Thomas introduced himself in a measured tone, though his voice trembled with suppressed anger. He told James he was Vanessa Carter's husband legally, on paper, a fact that no amount of spin could dismiss. James felt his world tilt. He stared at Thomas, trying to reconcile the words with the image. How was it possible that Vanessa could be married to someone else? The color drained from his face as Thomas revealed the entire story, how Vanessa had manipulated Thomas, stringing him along with promises that her relationship with James was just a short-term affair for financial gain. She needed capital, she claimed, to invest in a joint business venture that would eventually benefit both her and Thomas. Thomas provided proof, wedding certificates, text messages, and even letters from Vanessa promising him a share of the money once she secured enough from James. A storm of emotions raged inside James: anger, betrayal, humiliation. He felt the bitter irony of his situation. He had left his wife for a woman who was, herself, entangled in another marriage. Worse yet, he realized he might have been the pawn in Vanessa's grand plan. All his money, the lavish gifts, the marketing contracts, had it all been to line her pockets? Thomas revealed that he was done playing the quiet spouse. He wanted out of his toxic marriage and, in a twist, he offered James a proposition. If James paid Thomas a substantial sum of money, Thomas would disappear and relinquish any claims he had to Vanessa's potential earnings from James's businesses. Essentially, Thomas was extorting James. But from where James stood, it seemed like a lifeline, an opportunity to remove this man from the equation and salvage what remained of his pride. As Thomas left, James sank into his leather chair, reeling from the revelation. The mistress he had chosen over the only woman who ever truly cared for him was at the center of a web of lies. And there, in the middle of it all, he was left with nothing but regret and the looming threat of a scandal that could cost him not just his marriage, but the empire he had spent his life building. In the wake of Thomas's visit, James confronted Vanessa. He couldn't contain his rage as he hurled accusations at her, brandishing the documents Thomas had given him. Vanessa played it off at first, claiming Thomas was just a bitter ex who refused to move on. But the evidence was undeniable: wedding papers, shared financial accounts, and text messages confirming their ongoing relationship. Cornered, Vanessa switched tactics, sobbing dramatically, claiming that she had no choice but to keep Thomas at bay with money because he was threatening her. She insisted that her love for James was genuine, that she never meant for him to find out this way. James felt torn, a tempest of fury and hurt swirling within him. He demanded she leave the penthouse immediately. Vanessa's tears turned cold in an instant. Her wounded expression hardened, and she warned James not to make rash decisions. "I know more about your finances than you realize," she said, her voice quiet but seething with menace. "If you think you can just cast me aside without consequences, you're sorely mistaken." In that moment, James realized the precarious position he was in. Vanessa had access to confidential information about his upcoming deals, his partnerships, and potentially damaging details that could harm his reputation if made public. The memory of Caroline's unwavering support stung him like a fresh wound. He had cast aside the one person who truly had his back for a woman who threatened to ruin him if she didn't get her way. When Vanessa finally gathered her things and left, James stood alone in the penthouse. The city lights flickered through the panoramic windows, mocking him. He thought back to the day he told Caroline he was leaving her. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality that sometimes the allure of something new can mask a darker agenda. For the first time, he felt genuine remorse for breaking Caroline's heart and for his own foolishness. That night, James's phone buzzed with a call from his lawyer, alerting him to new motions filed by Caroline's legal team, requesting a thorough forensic audit of his finances. Panic set in. He knew that this audit could also expose any dubious transactions made under Vanessa's guidance. Moreover, the media was starting to smell blood. Gossip columns were leaking details about Vanessa's sudden move out of James's penthouse, speculating that the new power couple was already on the rocks. Meanwhile, Caroline found a surprising sense of calm in the chaos. The revelations about Vanessa validated her instincts. James's mistress was not simply a woman in love, but a conniving manipulator. Caroline didn't revel in James's downfall, but she recognized it as the bitter fruit of his own choices. She kept in close contact with Mark Stevenson and Olivia Pierce, providing them with the materials they needed to expose the entire fiasco if necessary. Unbeknownst to all, Vanessa had not played her last card. She was meeting with lawyers of her own, plotting a strategy to come out on top, financially and reputationally. She had a trove of documents that could tarnish James's name and even implicate him in questionable business dealings. If she leveraged them correctly, she could still secure an enormous settlement, or at least blackmail her way into riches. In the shadows of Charleston's gleaming skyline, the final act of betrayal was about to unfold. The atmosphere in the Charleston courthouse crackled with tension when James, Caroline, and their respective legal teams convened for a major divorce hearing. Reporters hovered outside the tall wooden doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of the estranged couple. Rumors ran rampant. Would James attempt to reconcile? Had Caroline uncovered more of his shady dealings? Was Vanessa going to make an appearance, or would she remain a spectre looming over the proceedings? Caroline was nervous, yet she carried herself with quiet determination, wearing a tailored navy suit. By her side, Beatrice Langston stood poised, a calm but formidable presence who had orchestrated an airtight case against James's claims. On the opposite side of the courtroom, James appeared haggard. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and the once unshakable confidence he wore like armor had diminished into grim resolve. When the proceedings began, Caroline's team presented evidence of James's financial misconduct. Documents highlighted suspicious transfers, shell corporations, and accounts linked to Vanessa Carter. Although not illegal on their own, these transactions raised enough red flags to cast doubt on James's narrative of a fair and amicable separation. Tensions escalated when Caroline's lawyer questioned James on the stand, asking if he was aware that Vanessa Carter was legally married to another man during their affair. James's jaw tightened, and his gaze flickered to the spectators, aware that the entire room was witnessing his humiliation. A turning point came when a sudden commotion at the rear of the courtroom caused heads to turn. In strode Vanessa Carter, wearing a crisp blazer and pencil skirt, her posture impeccably straight. She marched forward, her own attorney trailing behind, and requested to address the court. Shockwaves rippled through the gallery. No one had anticipated her appearance, least of all James. Vanessa began by presenting herself as a victim of circumstance, claiming that she had fallen in love with James while estranged from her husband, Thomas Carlyle. She admitted she kept her marriage a secret, but only because she feared Thomas's reaction. As she spoke, however, her tone shifted from self-pity to accusation. She alleged that James had pressured her into funneling money for tax purposes and that she was merely following his orders. She dropped hints of white-collar crimes, insinuating that James had used her to launder funds for shady deals. James erupted, calling Vanessa a liar. He insisted she orchestrated everything to siphon money from him, brandishing text messages that demonstrated her manipulative tactics. The courtroom devolved into pandemonium. Lawyers argued back and forth, the judge hounded by demands to either strike Vanessa's testimony or consider new evidence. In the midst of this chaos, Caroline sat, stunned at the spectacle unfolding before her. She realized that the man she had once loved was now tangled in an ever-widening net of deceit, fighting for his professional survival even more than his personal redemption. When the judge finally restored order, he ruled that more investigation was needed regarding the financial accusations. He announced a postponement of the ruling on the divorce settlement, giving both parties time to review the new allegations. A wave of exhaustion swept through Caroline. She had hoped this hearing would move her closer to closure. Instead, it ended in an explosive escalation, with Vanessa now threatening to bring James down alongside her if it suited her agenda. In the days that followed, the media had a field day dissecting every dramatic moment of the courthouse clash. Olivia Pierce's tabloid ran the headline, "Millionaire betrayed by Mistress, fraud allegations rock James Blackwood." Public opinion began to shift. Once seen as the archetypal wealthy philanderer who callously left his devoted wife, James was now painted as both a perpetrator and a possible victim of financial deceit. Caroline kept her distance from the swirling storm. She retreated to the modest home she grew up in, visiting her parents who still lived in Greenville. Sitting in her childhood bedroom, she gazed at old photographs, memories of simpler times. She felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that she was no longer trapped in James's web of ambition, heartbreak at how thoroughly their once promising love had deteriorated. Surrounded by her parents' quiet support, she took time to reflect on how she would move forward once the legal dust finally settled. Meanwhile, James was in free fall. Investors grew wary of his leadership. One by one, high-profile clients severed ties with Blackwood Enterprises, not wanting to be associated with scandal. Rumors circulated that James was liquidating assets to cover potential lawsuits, as well as to placate Vanessa and Thomas Carlyle, both of whom seemed eager to cash in on James's desperation. James scrambled to contain the damage, hiring a crisis management team and releasing carefully worded statements proclaiming his innocence. But the public was hungry for more salacious details, and no amount of polished PR could halt the speculation. Vanessa, ever calculating, saw an opening to leverage the chaos for her own benefit. If James was desperate, he might pay her handsomely to silence her allegations of financial impropriety, allegations that, whether true or not, could sink him. She arranged a covert meeting at a high-end restaurant, demanding a settlement so large it bordered on extortion. In return, she would sign a non-disclosure agreement about James's business practices. Cornered and furious, James agreed in principle, but insisted that she provide evidence that exonerated him from wrongdoing. They reached a tense stalemate, neither trusting the other enough to act first. While James struggled to juggle these ticking time bombs, a surprising ally emerged. Thomas Carlyle, newly emboldened, decided to meet privately with Caroline. He hoped to come clean about Vanessa's manipulations, to share any information that might strengthen Caroline's legal position against James, and by extension, cut off Vanessa's primary source of funding. They met in the same diner where Caroline had first spoken with Olivia Pierce. Over coffee, Thomas detailed how Vanessa bragged about taking James for a ride. She had told Thomas she would squeeze James dry, then disappear with the money. Thomas himself wanted only one thing: to be rid of Vanessa and the toxic marriage they shared. He saw Caroline as the only person who could stand up to Vanessa and James in court with enough moral high ground to come out on top. Caroline listened carefully, her emotions a mixture of empathy for Thomas's plight and deep disdain for Vanessa's cunning. She realized that in a twisted way, all of them, Caroline, Thomas, and James, had been Vanessa's pawns at one point or another. United by common betrayal, they forged a reluctant alliance. If they worked together to expose Vanessa's lies, perhaps they could free themselves from her manipulations once and for all. With the divorce hearing rescheduled for the following week, time was running out, and the stage was set for an explosive final confrontation that would decide the fate of everyone involved. On the day of the rescheduled divorce hearing, a hush settled over the courtroom as Caroline, James, and their assembled legal teams waited for the judge. This time, Thomas Carlyle sat in the gallery, a silent presence bearing witness to the final reckoning. Vanessa Carter was also there, eyes cold, her lawyer whispering instructions. The tension was palpable. Like the quiet before a storm, the judge called the court to order, emphasizing the gravity of the allegations. Both sides were given the opportunity to present new evidence. Caroline's attorney began, methodically laying out the chain of bank transfers, linking Vanessa to Thomas Carlyle and tying them back to James's accounts. Screens displayed images of text messages and emails that Mark Stevenson's investigation had uncovered. Caroline sat with her eyes focused straight ahead, determined to see this through. Next, James's lawyer attempted to dismantle Vanessa's claims. He argued that Vanessa had manipulated James, forging documents and creating a narrative that painted him as complicit in financial fraud. A hush fell when James himself took the stand. Under oath, he admitted to leaving Caroline for Vanessa, but he also confessed that he had been blind to Vanessa's ulterior motives. He disavowed any wrongdoing in business dealings, blaming Vanessa for forging or doctoring certain records, an accusation that sent Vanessa into a fiery outburst. Security guards stood ready, anticipating the heated exchange. Vanessa then took the stand, her demeanor shifting from control to furious. She accused James of being the mastermind behind every shady transaction. Her attorney produced documents that cast doubt on James's innocence. The entire courtroom was caught in a volley of allegations and counter-allegations, each side hurling damaging evidence at the other. Observers whispered that this was more than a divorce hearing. It was a high-stakes showdown where no one would walk away unscathed. Then came the moment Thomas Carlyle stepped up, choosing to speak as a witness. Everyone watched in suspense, aware that Thomas's testimony could tilt the scales one way or another. He took the oath and proceeded to recount his conversations with Vanessa, revealing how she had planned to extort James from the start. Text messages he presented showed Vanessa bragging about milking James's fortune. She even explained her strategy in detail, how she would push Caroline into a bitter divorce, ensuring James stayed reliant on her marketing skills and locked in a cycle of guilt and secrecy. The revelation exploded like a firecracker. Vanessa's face blanched. She tried to interrupt, yelling that Thomas was lying. But the judge sternly called for order. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously organized. In a final blow, Caroline's attorney revealed that, thanks to Thomas's cooperation, they possessed timestamps and digital footprints, confirming that Vanessa, not James, had initiated many of the questionable financial transactions. What followed was a flurry of legal deliberations. The judge, appalled by the manipulative tapestry laid bare, ruled that the divorce settlement should heavily favor Caroline, given the emotional distress and financial risks James had subjected her to. As for Vanessa, she now faced potential lawsuits for fraud, among other charges. The judge made it clear that further criminal investigation might follow, and that no settlement with James would protect her from that scrutiny. In the aftermath, James sat in stunned silence. His empire lay in tatters, his reputation marred, and he was saddled with a gargantuan divorce payout. Caroline stood up from her seat, tears threatening to spill, but held at bay by relief. She glanced once more at James, feeling a strange pang of pity. In the end, they both lost something precious, but only one of them had a chance to rebuild without the burden of betrayal hanging over their head. Outside the courtroom, the flash of cameras greeted Caroline. She took a deep breath, grateful for the swirl of fresh air. Beatrice Langston gently guided her away from the throng of reporters. Nearby, Thomas stared at Vanessa, who glared back at him before storming off, her future uncertain. Quietly, Thomas nodded to Caroline, and they parted ways. Caroline exhaled, realizing the weight she had been carrying for so long was finally lifting. The world spun on, the sun shone overhead, and in that moment, the possibility of a new beginning felt more real than ever. In the end, James Blackwood learned a harsh lesson. In betraying Caroline for the illusion of something grander, he himself became the ultimate victim of deceit. Caroline, once cast aside, discovered her own strength and walked away not just with a fair settlement, but with the empowerment to forge a new path. Vanessa's secret, which she thought would be her golden ticket to fortune, proved to be her undoing, unmasking her as a cunning manipulator willing to betray anyone, including her own husband. Thomas, for a shot at wealth, Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of love, betrayal, and redemption.
He was the dashing mogul every ambitious entrepreneur wanted to emulate. She was the poised, loyal wife who had stood by him from humble beginnings. No one would have guessed that behind the gated mansion's manicured lawns, betrayal festered like poison. Until one day, in a flurry of financial sabotage, he let his mistress cut off his wife's credit cards. It was humiliating, scandalous, and only the beginning of a whirlwind that would pit powerful business alliances against each other. In a boardroom confrontation that stunned everyone, the CEO himself stepped in, but not in the way anyone expected. Buckle up. This is the story of love, greed, and revenge. Jordan Alberts was not born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he learned to hustle by selling candy bars door to door at the age of 10. Over the years, Jordan's unwavering determination and charm propelled him into better circles. First at a local startup, then into his own tech company that caught the eye of an angel investor. By the time he was 35, Jordan was a self-made millionaire, a prominent figure on various entrepreneurial boards, and had connections with people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, and a few top executives at Google. His wife, Elizabeth Alberts née Wagner, had been with him through everything. They met in college at a small tech entrepreneur club meeting, both bright-eyed and dreaming of changing the world. Elizabeth came from a modest background, too. Her father was a retired auto mechanic, and her mother a homemaker. She'd studied communications with an emphasis on public relations, and it was through Elizabeth's network of contacts that Jordan first gained access to small local pitch events. While Jordan pitched his innovative software for automating small business tasks, Elizabeth made calls, arranged coffee meetups, and tried to capture the interest of potential backers. They married in a little chapel by Lake Michigan. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no star-studded guest list, no fancy reception at the Ritz. But to Jordan and Elizabeth, it felt perfect. A union built on genuine love, unwavering support, and a shared dream of building a life and a business empire together. Over the next decade, they grew from a modest condominium in Milwaukee to a stunning estate in Austin near Lake Travis, with a sweeping view of the water and rolling Texas hills. It was there at a philanthropic event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that Jordan's name landed on the radar of top-level investors. His company's smart automation technology was recognized for its potential to transform not just small businesses, but large-scale manufacturing and logistics. Soon after, Jordan's net worth skyrocketed from a mere $5 million to well over $200 million. For a while, everything was picture perfect. The marriage was strong, their personal synergy unwavering. Elizabeth handled some philanthropic duties, organizing events, acting as a goodwill ambassador for Jordan's brand, and forging new partnerships through her PR background. Their household staff adored them, describing Elizabeth as kind, gracious, and always mindful of the people around her. But money can be a seductive force, and success can open doors to darker temptations. Jordan began attending more exclusive networking events in Beverly Hills, New York, and beyond. Elizabeth was often at his side, but there were times she couldn't attend. Perhaps she was busy finalizing the details for a charity gala, or maybe she was simply burnt out from the unrelenting schedule. It was during these times, rare at first, then increasingly common, that Jordan got close to someone else. Her name was Ava Monroe. She was a rising star in the world of technology law, representing high-profile clients like Tesla, Amazon, and a few top-tier cryptocurrency exchanges. She had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations, seductive in social gatherings, and unbelievably charming behind closed doors. The rumor mill started buzzing the moment Ava was seen at Jordan's table during a private dinner after a tech summit in Las Vegas. Elizabeth wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Austin, meeting with a team of female entrepreneurs Jordan was mentoring. A few people whispered about Jordan's visible fascination with Ava, the way he leaned in whenever she spoke, how they clinked champagne flutes with an intimacy that suggested more than just business talk. No one knew for certain how fast or how deep it went, but soon the signs became undeniable. Lavish gifts appeared on Ava's social media, including a diamond bracelet, suspiciously similar to the ones Jordan's company had once gifted important clients. Photos emerged of Jordan and Ava at high-end restaurants in Manhattan, always carefully angled to obscure Jordan's face, though keen observers could still identify him by the sliver of a recognizable watch or the faint reflection in a mirrored wall. By the time the rumors reached Elizabeth, they were no longer rumors, but near-confirmed facts. She felt her chest tighten, her world spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. Jordan had always been a loyal partner. But the evidence was too compelling to deny. She confronted him in the privacy of their Lakeview mansion. At first, Jordan denied everything. Yet denial quickly turned into a half-hearted admission once Elizabeth presented him with photographic evidence. Like a skilled negotiator used to controlling deals, Jordan tried to manipulate the situation, insisting that Ava was just a business associate, someone he occasionally had dinner with. But Elizabeth saw right through it. She had always been adept at reading him. A chill settled over their once loving home. Elizabeth, determined to preserve her dignity, demanded they enter marriage counseling, or at the very least step away from high-profile events until they resolved their issues in private. Jordan nodded, providing non-committal answers. He had never liked therapy, never seen the point in discussing feelings with a stranger. He agreed to her wishes on the surface, yet beneath the facade, he continued his involvement with Ava, allowing the illicit relationship to take root. This was the calm before the storm. For soon Elizabeth's sense of betrayal would pale in comparison to the massive financial and emotional blow about to come her way. Weeks passed. Elizabeth tried to focus on her philanthropic work and personal projects, attempting to distract herself from the growing chasm between her and Jordan. When a local charity she sponsored invited her to discuss future donations, Elizabeth discovered something shocking. Her personal credit card was declined. Embarrassment washed over her in front of the unsuspecting staff. She tried another card. Sure, it must have been a glitch, but that too was declined. The staff politely suggested she call her bank, and Elizabeth excused herself with a polite smile, her hands trembling as she left the office. Elizabeth called the bank suspecting fraud or an administrative error. But the bank's representative informed her that both cards had been cancelled the previous week. Under their joint account, they were tied to Jordan's finances, and evidently Jordan had authorized the cancellation. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why on earth would Jordan cancel her cards without her knowledge or consent? They had never had major financial disputes. Elizabeth always had access to family funds, albeit responsibly. She dialed Jordan, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him several frantic texts. No response. Later that evening, Jordan came home exuding an air of tired disinterest. Elizabeth confronted him the moment he walked through the door. Under the chandelier's glow, which reflected in her tear-filled eyes, Jordan brushed aside her questions with a dismissive wave. "I needed to consolidate our finances," he said, removing his blazer. "You can use the joint checking account for a while." "No big deal, no big deal." Elizabeth's frustration swelled. "You cancelled my credit cards without even telling me what's going on. Are you punishing me for something? Jordan's eyes flicked away nervously, and that was when Elizabeth realized he was lying again. The next words that came from his mouth were not only shocking, but also laced with a cruelty she never imagined he was capable of. Ava suggested we revisit some of my expenses. She found that you were spending frivolously. It made sense to limit credit usage. Elizabeth's heart dropped to her stomach. Ava. That woman was now meddling in their finances. As if the affair wasn't enough, Jordan had allowed this mistress to encroach into an arena that Elizabeth believed was sacred, her own household stability. What is Ava doing reviewing my spending? Since when does your fling get to decide what is or isn't frivolous? Elizabeth spat tears, threatening to spill. Jordan made an attempt at a calming gesture, but his words only fanned the flames. She's helping me restructure. Her firm has great insights into corporate finances. This is about the business, Elizabeth. It's not personal. Not personal. Elizabeth recalled how intimately personal their marriage had always been. They built every aspect of their lives together, from small decisions about wallpaper colors to big entrepreneurial leaps that demanded everything from both of them. Now Jordan was shutting her out, consulting Ava instead. In a quavering voice, Elizabeth demanded, "Reinstate my cards. I am your wife. I have a right to our finances, and you know I've never been irresponsible with money." Jordan's face hardened with a new arrogance. "Not until we finalize our restructure," he said, referring to some nebulous plan Elizabeth knew little about. "I'll handle everything in the meantime." That moment, that cold exchange, was a harbinger of the bigger heartbreak to come. If Jordan was letting Ava control such details, what other aspects of their marriage was he willing to let her sabotage? As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth discovered one more blow after another. The monthly allowance she used to cover household expenses had been slashed without explanation. The staff, including her personal assistant, was laid off. Bills began piling up, addressed to her name, but with no means to pay them aside from groveling at Jordan's feet. Friends and family started to notice. Elizabeth tried to hide her shame. She confided in her sister Caroline, who was enraged at Jordan. "This is financial abuse," Caroline insisted. "You should speak to a lawyer." Elizabeth shuddered at the thought. She still believed they could salvage their relationship, that Jordan would snap out of whatever daze Ava had put him in. Yet a small part of her whispered that maybe Caroline was right. Then came a fateful meeting at a hotel conference suite in Los Angeles, one that Jordan had insisted Elizabeth attend. It was a gathering of major tech moguls, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who were rumored to be there to discuss new tech innovations in global logistics. When Elizabeth arrived, she quickly realized something was off. She saw Jordan in the lounge area, standing far too close to Ava, exchanging hushed conversations. Seeing Elizabeth from a distance, Jordan slipped away discreetly, leaving Ava behind. Elizabeth approached her husband with a forced smile. "I'm here," she said, desperate to maintain composure. "What's the plan?" Jordan gave a curt nod. "There's a closed-door session for the key players only. You'll have to wait outside." In the past, Elizabeth had always been included in these key player sessions as Jordan's partner and PR advisor. The subtle exclusion burned her pride. She swallowed her anger. "Sure, I can wait." After hours of waiting, she found Jordan and Ava laughing together near the bar. As she approached, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he stepped away. That was when Ava turned a chilling smirk on her face. "You know Jordan's a visionary," Ava said, swirling the wine in her glass. "He needs someone who can keep up with him on all levels: business, ambition, excitement." Elizabeth felt her face flush with anger. "I've been by his side for years. We built this together." Ava gave a theatrical shrug. "Maybe in the past. But times change. People evolve. I guess you were too comfortable." Elizabeth clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She was determined not to make a scene in front of such influential people. But oh, how she wanted to lash out to expose Ava for the home wrecker she was. Ava flicked her hair behind her shoulder, noticing Elizabeth's agitation. "Things will be better if you accept it," she cooed, as if offering advice to a friend. Jordan's moved on in more ways than one. The finances are just the beginning. Elizabeth's body went cold. She realized in that moment how truly precarious her situation was. Ava was not simply a fling. She was positioning herself as a partner in Jordan's professional and personal life. The credit cards were just one step in what looked like a systematic campaign to push Elizabeth out of everything she and Jordan had built. Still, Elizabeth refused to crumble. She left the event quietly, but her mind churned with rage and heartbreak. It was time for her to take action. She needed to protect herself, her assets, and her dignity. Little did she know that as she plotted her next move, Jordan and Ava were preparing a financial ambush that would push her to the brink. Only fate and an unexpected intervention by a certain CEO would alter the course of their twisted game. In the days after the Los Angeles conference, Elizabeth attempted to consult with attorneys. She picked up a referral from a friend who once worked with a high-profile divorce lawyer in New York. The initial phone calls were sobering, with Jordan's empire being primarily under his name and her credit cards cancelled. She had limited liquidity to hire top-tier representation. Even so, Elizabeth pressed forward. She managed to scrape together some funds from a personal savings account. Jordan had no access to money she had set aside from her early PR consulting days. It wasn't a large sum, but enough to secure a preliminary consultation. During that consultation, her lawyer, Michelle Liu, a bright and empathetic but hard-hitting attorney based in Houston, laid out the hard truth. Financial abuse and infidelity are serious grounds for divorce, Michelle said, scanning through Elizabeth's financial statements. But if Jordan's funneling money and assets into new accounts under his own name, or shifting resources to places you can't see, we need proof, and we need it fast. Elizabeth swallowed. She recounted Ava's involvement, how she was effectively orchestrating the restructuring. Michelle's pen scribbled quickly over a notepad. "You have a right to half of the marital assets, Elizabeth, but it looks like your husband is 2 steps ahead. We must move quickly." The plan was to gather evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing and file a court order to freeze marital assets, ensuring Elizabeth had a fair shot. But as they began drafting documents and rummaging through what records, Elizabeth had an avalanche of shocking details surfaced. Jordan wasn't merely cancelling credit cards. He was transferring stocks from their joint portfolio into an account under his newly formed trust. He had changed the authorized signatory details for a few of their properties, effectively locking Elizabeth out. He was also taking out lines of credit against certain properties, presumably to fund new ventures that, as Elizabeth suspected, involved Ava. The emotional strain weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She couldn't sleep, her appetite waned. Each day felt like standing at the center of a storm. Yet if she thought this was the worst of it, she was mistaken. One evening, after finalizing some documents with Michelle, Elizabeth returned to her mansion to find her key card didn't work on the electronic locks. Pounding on the door, she shouted for the live-in staff if any were left. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Ava's face. Jordan's not here, Ava said icily. You should call next time. Elizabeth's heart hammered. This is my home. Get out of my way, she demanded, trying to push past. But Ava slid in front of her, refusing to budge. He told me you're not welcome here anymore until the legal mess is settled. Ava sneered. I have every right to ask you to leave. Elizabeth was trembling with fury. You have no rights here. You're the mistress, not the wife. With a cold laugh, Ava stepped aside and pointed at Elizabeth's luggage haphazardly placed in the foyer. Jordan left these for you, she said. He said to pack whatever else you need and let security escort you out if you refuse to leave. Elizabeth blinked away tears, her throat raw with outrage. She was being thrown out of her own home by the woman who had intruded into her marriage. That moment was a cruel epiphany. Jordan had not only cut off her finances, but now he was physically pushing her out of the place she had shared with him for years. Yet in all that darkness, a sliver of light emerged the next morning. Elizabeth received a phone call from a close mutual friend, Marcus O'Donnell, who worked with Jordan at a large tech conglomerate in Dallas. Marcus was someone Elizabeth trusted, an executive who had known Jordan since the early days. He had seen them build the company from the ground up. Elizabeth Marcus said, his tone urgent. I don't know everything that's going on, but I heard from your staff that you've been locked out. There's a board meeting next week. Jordan wants to finalize some big decisions. If you can get to that meeting and talk to the chairman, maybe you can find some leverage. Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. The chairman of this particular conglomerate was none other than famed CEO David Hartridge, known not just for his visionary leadership, but also for a strict code of ethics. Over the years, Hartridge had invested heavily in Jordan's business. He was the reason Jordan sat on that board. He's not the type to meddle in personal affairs, Marcus warned. But if Jordan's pulling stunts that compromise your share in the company, Hartridge might step in. He's big on fairness and hates scandal. It was the glimmer of hope Elizabeth needed. She thanked Marcus profusely. The plan was simple. Attend the board meeting, confront Jordan in front of Hartridge, and present enough evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing to ensure the board and possibly the entire conglomerate would not stand for it. She spent the week gathering documents, bank statements, and text message screenshots that implicated Jordan in unscrupulous financial moves. Michelle Liu helped compile everything into a neat folder. You need to be prepared for Jordan to lash out, Michelle warned. He'll try to discredit you in front of the board. Elizabeth nodded her determination, overshadowing her fear. She practiced her speech, reciting it in the mirror of her modest hotel room, where she had temporarily moved. Heart pounding, she told herself that if there was ever a time to fight, it was now. Finally, the day of the board meeting arrived. Elizabeth dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that radiated confidence. She walked into the corporate skyscraper in downtown Dallas, her chin held high despite the knot in her stomach. She spotted Jordan in the corridor, flanked by Ava and a couple of the board members. As soon as he saw Elizabeth, his expression darkened. You're not supposed to be here, Jordan said, trying to keep his voice low. Elizabeth raised her chin. I'm still an investor in your company. I hold shares. So yes, I'm attending the board meeting. Ava stepped in with a condescending smile. Don't make a scene, Elizabeth. This meeting is for serious stakeholders. I am a serious stakeholder, Elizabeth retorted, voice steady. I'm your wife, still legally, and I'm half of this empire's foundation. Behind them, a tall figure approached CEO David Hartridge himself. a man in his 50s with greying temples and a firm handshake. He regarded Elizabeth with polite curiosity. "Ms. Alberts, I presume?" Elizabeth nodded, handing over her invitation papers and a letter from her attorney, which stated that she possessed partial shares. Hartridge studied the documents, then gave a curt nod indicating she was allowed to attend. Jordan shot Elizabeth a glare that spoke volumes. You have no idea what you're getting into. But Elizabeth did. She was here to preserve her dignity, her livelihood, and the legacy she had helped build. The meeting commenced in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. The board members sat around a large mahogany table, exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming quarter's projections. Jordan made a short presentation on a new partnership with a logistics firm, highlighting expansions and new contracts. A few board members clapped. Then came time for open discussion. Elizabeth raised her hand, clearing her throat. "I'd like to address some concerns about the financial structuring Jordan is proposing." She began, her voice reverberating across the silent room. Jordan's face reddened. Ava, seated beside him, tried to intervene. "We should keep personal matters out of board discussions," she said. But Elizabeth pressed on, raising the folder of evidence. "These changes aren't just personal," Elizabeth said. "They could affect company stability. Jordan is funneling resources into a new trust, making questionable decisions without transparency. I have documents signed by him with references to Ms. Ava Monroe, demonstrating a conflict of interest that could potentially compromise investor trust." A hush fell over the room. Hartridge's brow creased. "Jordan, is this true?" Jordan stood, scrambling for composure. "This is a personal matter. Elizabeth is overstepping her bounds." "She's not." Hartridge replied, his voice sharp. "If there's a conflict of interest that threatens the stability of our partnership, it's very much a board matter." Jordan's eyes darted between Hartridge and Elizabeth. For the first time, he seemed cornered, uncertain how to proceed. Ava shot Elizabeth a lethal glare, realizing that Elizabeth's boldness had forced the topic into official territory. The tension was palpable. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly, she was certain everyone could hear it. But she stood her ground. Continuing. "I also discovered lines of credit being taken against marital properties to fund expansions. These expansions could be legitimate, but the details are obscured. I have reason to believe Ms. Monroe is manipulating these finances for her personal gain." Murmurs rippled through the board. A couple members exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who might have sided with Jordan seemed rattled by the magnitude of Elizabeth's accusations. Hartridge steepled his fingers, evaluating the situation. "I propose we recess for 15 minutes. Jordan, Elizabeth, Ms. Monroe, please step into my office." Jordan inhaled frustration etched across his features, but he couldn't refuse the CEO's request, not without causing a catastrophic scene. The three followed Hartridge into a glass-walled corner office, shutting the door behind them. In that tense, enclosed space, the real battle began. Elizabeth laid out her evidence on the polished table before Hartridge. Jordan tried to dismiss it all as a personal dispute, but Hartridge was no fool. He could see the potential for scandal, especially if a partner was using company infrastructure for personal vendettas. Throughout this heated exchange, Ava attempted to deflect blame. She portrayed herself as a legal advisor, merely suggesting financial moves, disclaiming any wrongdoing. But Elizabeth's carefully compiled documents suggested otherwise. Emails, text messages, and proposed legal documents bore Ava's digital fingerprints. Hartridge's expression darkened. "Jordan, this is unacceptable. If these documents are authentic, you've put your personal entanglements ahead of corporate responsibility. I won't allow it under my leadership. Jordan's face went pale. He tried to protest, to label Elizabeth's claims as overblown, but Hartridge had already made up his mind. Until this is sorted out, Jordan, I'm placing your proposals on hold. We can't move forward with any major financial changes if they're under this sort of ethical cloud. Elizabeth felt a surge of relief, a faint vindication. While she hadn't resolved the core issue of Jordan's betrayal, at least the board wasn't letting him run roughshod over her financial future. But Jordan, cornered and embarrassed, lashed out in desperation. "You can't shut me down like this," he snapped at Hartridge, voice tight with anger. "I'm the one who made that original deal with your conglomerate. You need my innovation." Hartridge stood up, bristling at Jordan's tone. "I'm the CEO, and you've just made me question your reliability and integrity. Watch yourself, Jordan." Ava stepped closer to Jordan, placing a hand on his arm to calm him, but he shrugged her off. "You'll regret this," he warned Hartridge, then turned to Elizabeth. "And you made a fool of me in front of everyone." Elizabeth clenched her fists, refusing to cower. "You did that to yourself," she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Jordan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ava followed quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Hartridge sighed, looking at Elizabeth, who was holding back tears. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," Hartridge said. "I'm sorry about your personal struggles, but I have to protect the board's interests. If you need anything, contact my office. I'm not a family court judge, but I won't let Jordan drag the company down." With that, Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. She had achieved a small but crucial victory, yet she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Jordan, humiliated and cornered, was far from finished. She left the skyscraper, stepping out into the bright Dallas sun, uncertain, but determined. Little did she know this chapter was only the start of a far more explosive confrontation, one that would involve security teams, sudden betrayals, and a twist that would bring Jordan himself to his knees. Life outside the mansion was lonely, but Elizabeth was thankful for the reprieve from Ava's manipulations. She rented a small apartment near downtown Austin and used what funds she had left to secure her basic needs, while Michelle continued to press for a financial freeze on Jordan's assets. In the weeks following the tense board meeting, Jordan went surprisingly quiet. No more legal letters arrived. No more credit lines were sabotaged. He didn't attempt to contact Elizabeth, nor did Ava. Instead, it seemed as though they had retreated into some silent fortress, likely strategizing their next move. Elizabeth took advantage of the lull. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, explaining partially at least what she was going through. While many were shocked, they offered support in the form of references, moral encouragement, and occasional leads for a stable job or a business partnership. Despite the heartbreak, Elizabeth discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a passive bystander in Jordan's world. She had her own capabilities, her own strengths. Slowly, she started consulting for small tech firms, using her communications and PR background to help them craft compelling pitches. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest work that reminded her she could stand on her own 2 feet. Then one evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. A crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Hello, Elizabeth. This is Patricia Carlson. I'm an executive assistant at Tesla, working under Elon Musk's leadership team." Elizabeth's heart thudded. She had met Patricia briefly at a tech conference in Berlin 2 years ago, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "How can I help you?" Elizabeth asked, mind racing. Patricia hesitated. I might have information relevant to your predicament with Jordan. Let's just say some of our legal divisions have been observing Ava Monroe for a while, and some red flags have come up. Red flags. Elizabeth's curiosity flared. You're investigating her? A slow exhale from the other end. Our major concern is that she's potentially engaged in insider trading, or at least something that veers close to it. She's been known to manipulate powerful men to gain inside info on deals, especially around new technologies. We don't have direct evidence, but we do know that she's heavily involved in your husband's finances. We suspect she might be siphoning resources for her own agendas. Elizabeth's mind reeled. This was bigger than a domestic spat. Ava might be leveraging Jordan's resources and connections to stake her own claims in the tech world. That explained the sudden shifts in finances, the new trust accounts, and the lines of credit. Patricia continued. We want to bring her down, but we need more information. You, Elizabeth, might be in a unique position to gather that. Elizabeth tapped her fingers on the kitchen counter. Isn't that something your legal team handles? A rueful laugh. Yes, but we need Jordan's direct involvement. We suspect he's unwittingly giving her access to confidential materials through corporate crossovers or joint ventures. If you can help us prove it, we can kill two birds with one stone, protect Tesla's proprietary data, and help you gain leverage in your divorce. Elizabeth considered the offer. It was risky. If Ava was truly up to something illegal, Elizabeth could expose herself to potential backlash, but the lure of finally getting the upper hand was strong. I'll do what I can, Elizabeth replied cautiously. But how do I communicate with you about this? Patricia gave her a secure email address and instructions on how to encrypt files. And one more thing, Patricia said, before hanging up. People like Ava are cunning. She'll anticipate your every move. Don't trust phone lines or any device that Jordan has access to. Be careful. Elizabeth thanked her and ended the call. Adrenaline coursing through her. For the next few days, she scoured her digital archives for anything that might hint at insider information. Jordan's old emails messages about collaborations with major tech companies like Tesla or Amazon, documents that Ava might have manipulated anything that showed a trail of questionable activity. She found a few suspicious threads, forwarded emails from Jordan's corporate account that were CC'd to Ava's personal address. Attachments relating to Tesla's Project Next Gen battery were among them, though none of this was strictly proof of wrongdoing yet. Elizabeth compiled what she could and sent them to the secure email Patricia provided. In response, Patricia confirmed that these were valuable leads, but incomplete. Keep digging, she urged, and let me know if you get direct evidence of deals or monetary gains tied to these inside details. Meanwhile, Michelle Elizabeth's lawyer was preparing for a preliminary hearing to freeze some of Jordan's assets. She insisted Elizabeth come to court to testify about the financial abuse and the suspicious activities they had uncovered. But Jordan's side surprised them by agreeing to a partial freeze without argument. That's strange, Michelle said, tapping a pen against the conference table. Why would he agree so easily? Elizabeth shrugged, perplexed. Maybe he realizes fighting me will look bad in front of the board. But Michelle wasn't convinced. I suspect he's preparing a bigger move. Be vigilant. He may have more leverage than we know. The next morning, Elizabeth received an unsolicited text from Jordan. We need to talk, face to face. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, curiosity. But she knew she had to tread carefully. She agreed to meet him in a public place, a cafe near the courthouse, where she could keep the upper hand. When Jordan arrived, he looked tired, as though the weight of his troubles had worn him down. He offered a half smile, which Elizabeth did not return. "Liz?" He began using the old nickname he once uttered, with affection. Things got out of hand. She crossed her arms. "You think—" He sighed, scanning her face for warmth that was no longer there. "I want to settle this amicably. We can discuss spousal support, property divisions, everything. No need for a long, nasty court battle." Elizabeth let the silence hover. She wasn't naive enough to believe him at face value. "Amicably? Are you telling me Ava is out of the picture?" Jordan's shoulders tensed. "This is about you and me, not her. Look, maybe I got carried away with Ava's advice. She's a brilliant attorney." "She's manipulative," Elizabeth cut in sharply. He brushed the point aside. "Regardless, I'm willing to compromise, but I need you to lay off this insider trading nonsense. It's reckless. You're endangering my reputation." Elizabeth realized then that Jordan knew she'd been snooping into his communications. Perhaps Tesla's legal inquiries had begun reverberating in his circle. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried, if not about losing her, then about losing his empire. "You made me the enemy," Elizabeth replied, in a hushed, trembling tone. "When you let your mistress cut off my cards and throw me out of my home." Jordan looked away, shame flickering on his face. "I didn't handle that well. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under with these deals." She waited, letting him squirm. Then he continued. "You'll get a fair share. I promise. I just need you to stop meddling in my professional affairs, especially with Tesla or any other major collaborators. You'll ruin me if you do." A bitter laugh escaped Elizabeth. She thought of all the times she had stood beside him, protecting him, representing him before powerful players, forging alliances that were crucial to his success. Now he was pleading for her, not to ruin him. The irony nearly choked her. Before she could respond, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered a soft curse. "I have to go," he said, throwing some cash on the table for their untouched coffees. Elizabeth watched him leave, a mixture of pity and disdain swirling in her stomach. It was obvious he was desperate, but was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a ploy to keep her from uncovering more incriminating information about Ava? That question lingered as she returned to her apartment, drained. However, a new email from Patricia waited in her inbox. It contained an attachment, a partial timeline of suspicious trades linked to accounts rumored to be controlled by Ava Monroe. There were large bets placed on Tesla's stock ahead of public announcements. Gains in the tens of millions. This is huge, Elizabeth thought. If she connected these trades to emails or calls between Jordan and Ava, it could be the smoking gun. And while Elizabeth had no intention of going to the feds on her own, Tesla's legal team could bury Ava, and by extension, Jordan's complicity, if he was involved. Elizabeth clutched her phone, anxiety coursing through her. She was walking a razor's edge. One false step, and Jordan might retaliate more fiercely, or Ava might strike. But a successful strike against Ava could free Elizabeth from this entire ordeal, giving her the leverage to secure a fair divorce settlement, or even land Jordan in deeper trouble, depending on his role. She reached for her phone to text Patricia when it buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number again. Tentatively, Elizabeth answered. A man's voice greeted her, calm and steady. "Hello, Ms. Alberts. My name is Gregory Shaw. I'm part of CEO David Hartridge's legal counsel. He asked me to follow up regarding the situation with your husband." Elizabeth's heart skipped. Hartridge's legal counsel. "We understand from Mr. Hartridge's conversation with you that there might be unethical or even illegal behavior in play." Gregory continued. "The board is concerned about potential liability if Jordan's personal dealings spill into our corporate structure. We can't risk another scandal. Mr. Hartridge would like to assist you discreetly." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She was on the cusp of powerful alliances forming against Jordan and Ava, but the more people got involved, the more dangerous it felt. Gregory concluded, "We'll be in touch with your lawyer. If you have any crucial evidence, Mr. Hartridge suggests you keep it secure. He wants to avoid a public meltdown, but he's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the company's interests, and that includes supporting you in your legal disputes if it comes to that." Hanging up. Elizabeth felt a measure of validation. The cracks in Jordan's seemingly untouchable world were growing. Perhaps justice would prevail. Yet as she prepared to finalize the next round of documents for Michelle, a gnawing worry kept her awake at night. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Jordan, though once gentle and loving, had shown he could be ruthless when threatened. She braced herself for the storm that was surely coming. The next time Elizabeth saw Jordan in person, it wasn't by chance or a carefully arranged meeting. It was at the headquarters of Hartridge's conglomerate in Dallas. A sudden emergency board session had been called to address urgent corporate matters, and Elizabeth, having been notified by Gregory Shaw, arrived prepared. She walked into the reception area, her heart pounding with anticipation. Michelle Liu had insisted on accompanying her, but at the last minute she was called to handle a crucial filing. Elizabeth went alone, relying on the moral support from Gregory and the knowledge that Hartridge wanted the truth on record. Jordan was already inside the boardroom with Ava, who paced like a clad tiger. When Elizabeth entered, they both snapped their heads in her direction. Ava's glare could have sliced glass. Jordan's face was inscrutable, tense, angry, but also tinged with fear. Hartridge arrived moments later, trailed by a few board members and legal advisors. He wasted no time in stating the purpose of the meeting. "Allegations have come to my attention that Ms. Monroe has been engaging in stock trades leveraging proprietary information from Jordan's company and potentially from our own collaborations. We need to clarify the truth. Now." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Ava's jaw clenched. "This is preposterous," she began. "We demand to see your proof." Hartridge nodded to one of his advisors, who distributed printed documents, timelines of suspicious trades tied to accounts flagged by Tesla's legal team, along with correspondences that Elizabeth and Patricia had pieced together. Jordan snatched a packet from the advisor. His eyes swept over the page's color, draining from his face. Ava's lips thinned, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes. Hartridge pinned them with a stern gaze. "Jordan, you've been a valuable partner. I don't want to see your personal life derail your professional standing, but this is bigger than your marriage. Insider trading is a federal crime, and if Ms. Monroe is using your business resources to pull this off, you're implicated." Ava recovered quickly. She placed a hand on Jordan's arm, her voice smooth. "This is a misunderstanding, David. Anyone can align stock trades with corporate announcements. It's called speculation." Elizabeth decided enough was enough. She stood. "Speculation is one thing, but forwarding private emails, entire business proposals, and preliminary press releases is not speculation. I've seen the messages. You're literally discussing the best times to execute trades, based on announcements that hadn't been made public yet. Ava whirled on Elizabeth. You have no legal standing to claim that. You're just a scorned wife trying to sabotage Jordan and me. Elizabeth's blood boiled. We'll let the evidence speak. There are even time-stamped emails from Jordan's corporate account sent to your personal email, Ms. Monroe, discussing upcoming expansions and product launches. Then trades were executed in your name or trusts linked to you within hours. A hush followed. Jordan's hands shook slightly. He seemed torn between denial and guilt. After all, the evidence was damning. If he denied it outright, he'd appear foolish. But if he admitted his involvement, he risked criminal charges and the wrath of the board. Hartridge leaned forward, his voice firm. Jordan, I need answers. Were you aware of these trades? Jordan stared at the table, words refusing to form. Finally, he managed Ava said it was all above board, that it was just normal investing. Ava let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow. If you want to scapegoat me, Jordan, think carefully, she warned. We made certain deals in your name as well. Your signatures are on plenty of documents. The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Hartridge addressed one of his legal advisors. Have we sent this to the SEC? Not yet, the advisor responded. We wanted to confront them first. Jordan shot to his feet, panic etched on his face. No need to escalate it. We can handle this internally. If I undo the trades, repay any gains, repay tens of millions of dollars, Hartridge asked. And that would just be the tip of the iceberg if the SEC digs deeper. This is out of our hands if they launch a formal investigation. Elizabeth watched Jordan unravel. This was the man who had once been so composed, so unstoppable. Now he was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ava, too, looked like a wild animal backed into a corner, eyes darting around the room. At that moment, a building security guard appeared at the door, knocking softly. Mr. Hartridge, you asked for security on standby, he announced quietly. Thank you, Hartridge replied, his tone like steel. I believe we might need you. Ava's eyes flitted towards the door, then back to Hartridge. She adopted a pleading tone. David, you know me. I've handled legal matters for some of the biggest players in the industry. I would never do anything to jeopardize your trust. Hartridge's face remained stony. I trusted Jordan, not you. And this evidence suggests you're at the center of a major ethical breach. If you don't have a verifiable explanation for each of these trades and how you obtained insider information, I have no choice but to protect the company from liability. Suddenly, Jordan snapped. Fear twisted into anger, and he pointed a trembling finger at Elizabeth. You did this. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle that I moved on. Elizabeth steadied her breathing, preparing to reply. But Hartridge cut in calm yet firm. Don't blame her for your poor decisions. You let your personal affair become a corporate liability. Something in Jordan cracked. He lunged toward Elizabeth as if to grab her documents or her phone, an irrational move likely spurred by desperation. But he never made contact. In a blink, the security guard stepped forward and intercepted Jordan, gripping his arms. Stand down, sir, the guard said, voice authoritative. Jordan struggled, but the guard was a solid wall of muscle. Ava shrieked. Let him go. This is a private matter. Hartridge shook his head, anger coloring his features. You just attempted to assault someone in my boardroom. Security remove Mr. Alberts from the premises. Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. You can't do that. I'm on the board. Not anymore, Hartridge said grimly. I can and I will. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Once that concludes, we'll determine your status. Now go and take Ms. Monroe with you. A second guard stepped in, guiding Ava toward the door as she protested threatening lawsuits and defamation claims. But her words rang hollow, overshadowed by the looming specter of an SEC investigation. Elizabeth stood off to the side, stunned by how quickly it had escalated from a tension-filled meeting to an outright meltdown. As Jordan and Ava were led out, Jordan craned his neck to shout at her, "You'll pay for this, Elizabeth. Don't think you've won." But the threat carried little weight now. In that moment, Elizabeth felt the mixture of triumph and sorrow that comes with toppling a man she once loved. She hadn't wanted to see Jordan destroyed, only to protect herself and the life they had built together. But Jordan's actions and Ava's ambition had forced her hand. Hartridge dismissed the board members, soon after instructing his legal team to cooperate fully with any investigations. He turned to Elizabeth with a sympathetic frown. "I'm sorry you had to endure this, Miss Alberts. I assure you we'll handle it lawfully. Whatever personal or marital disputes remain, I hope you find closure." Elizabeth gave him a small nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your fairness." She gathered her documents and left the skyscraper, the bright Texas sun striking her face as she stepped onto the street. The entire drama replayed in her mind. He let his mistress cut off my cards, but the CEO called security on him. She thought a bitter yet satisfying sense of irony spreading in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Legal battles would continue, depositions would be taken, and the divorce was far from final. But in this pivotal moment, she had taken back her power, standing against the storm that Jordan and Ava had unleashed. And for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope that she might in the end be free from their tyranny. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up on rumors of insider trading linked to a high-profile tech investor, hinting that a major name was under investigation. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to connect the dots to Jordan Alberts and his mysterious attorney-turned-partner, Ava Monroe. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, inundated with calls and messages from acquaintances, reporters, and sometimes even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most of them, preferring to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the media frenzy. Jordan, under immense legal and financial pressure, attempted to strike a deal if Elizabeth agreed to keep quiet and not testify against him or Ava. Regarding insider trading, he would give her a generous divorce settlement. The settlement included alimony, a hefty lump sum, and properties that would secure her financial future. However, Elizabeth refused any agreement that required her to lie or withhold the truth if subpoenaed. Nonetheless, she allowed her lawyer Michelle to work out a fair settlement that didn't involve perjury. Eventually, Jordan capitulated, realizing he had to salvage what he could from the marriage and business meltdown. The final settlement granted Elizabeth a significant portion of the assets, the mansion by Lake Travis, ironically, and a sizable share of Jordan's original tech startup. Meanwhile, Ava disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. Rumors surfaced that she'd fled the country, perhaps to avoid legal repercussions, while others suggested she was hiding out in some luxury villa, waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, her days of meddling in Jordan's finances seemed to be over. Elizabeth didn't celebrate Jordan's downfall. She quietly grieved the end of a marriage that had started in love and partnership. yet she also felt relief and a renewed sense of self. She returned to the Lake Travis mansion, deciding whether to keep it or sell. The sweeping views of the water brought back memories, some of which felt like knives to her heart, others that warmed her soul. She began a new chapter in her life, leveraging her PR skills to start a consultancy focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate both business and personal challenges. She named it Phoenix Rose Consulting, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. To her surprise, she found more joy in championing other women than she ever did, standing behind Jordan at glitzy galas. She kept in touch with Patricia from Tesla, who occasionally updated her on the ongoing investigations. Whether Jordan faced criminal charges depended on further evidence. But at least for Elizabeth, the immediate threat to her assets and well-being had lifted. David Hartridge reached out, once inviting Elizabeth to a dinner with the board, presumably to mend fences. Elizabeth politely declined. She had no desire to relive the tension of board meetings or navigate corporate politics, where her personal life became public fodder. She was grateful for Hartridge's stance, but preferred to build her future away from the chaos. In moments of solitude, Elizabeth reflected on the entire ordeal. She'd once believed that love, loyalty, and shared ambition could conquer anything. Yet she also realized that unchecked power and ego could corrode even the strongest of bonds. Jordan's betrayal had been a painful lesson, but it set her free to discover her own strengths and a life not tethered to someone else's rising star. Yes, heartbreak lingered, and healing was an ongoing process. But Elizabeth found herself waking each day with a sense of purpose. She'd gather with female founders at local co-working spaces, host workshops on media relations, and offer moral support to those feeling overshadowed by bigger players. Each time she saw a spark of confidence ignite in another woman's eyes, she felt her own sense of wholeness return. In time, Elizabeth would finalize the divorce, sign the deeds, and officially start over. A sense of calm settled within her, like the slow, tranquil waves on Lake Travis at dawn. Her story, the humiliating card cancellations, the public meltdown, the mistress's meddling, would become a cautionary tale, one she shared sparingly, only when it might help others. Despite the scars, Elizabeth refused to let bitterness define her. She chose growth empathy, and a belief that with the right support, anyone can rise from the ashes more formidable than before. Just as Elizabeth thought she had reached stable ground, fate tossed her another curveball. A month after the settlement, Michelle called her urgently. "The feds want to depose you," she said. "They uncovered new evidence Jordan may be involved in deeper crimes, bribery, money laundering. Ava might have orchestrated a network." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Jordan never mentioned anything like that. "They've found offshore transactions and documents with his signature," Michelle said grimly. 2 days later, Elizabeth sat in a stark federal office, flanked by Michelle and 2 serious agents. They questioned her about Jordan's finances, Ava's role, the card cancellations, and philanthropic events that may have masked backdoor deals. Elizabeth stuck to the facts. She neither speculated nor dramatized. One agent, impressed, said, "You've been very helpful, Ms. Alberts. This case is significant." She left emotionally drained but relieved. She hadn't been dragged down with Jordan, but the storm wasn't over. Whispers followed Jordan was hiding at a secluded ranch, dodging the press. Ava had vanished. More subpoenas were issued. An indictment loomed. Elizabeth stayed focused on her consultancy, channeling stress into helping other women navigate business pitfalls. Her story, once painful, became a symbol of warning and strength. Then came the headlines, Jordan Alberts indicted for insider trading fraud and obstruction. Ava was named but still missing. The scandal rocked the tech world. Elizabeth issued a single statement. I'm saddened by Jordan's choices. I've cooperated fully with authorities and continue to rebuild my life. Eventually, Jordan pled guilty to a lesser charge, offering a tearful courtroom apology. Elizabeth watched from home, tears in her eyes, not from triumph, but quiet grief for the man she once loved. Still, she understood consequences had to follow actions. That night, beneath the soft moonlight over Lake Travis, Elizabeth allowed herself one last cry for the past that died and the hope still waiting ahead. Life has a way of testing our fortitude when we least expect it. Elizabeth Alberts began this journey as a devoted wife, only to see her world upended by betrayal and financial sabotage. Yet what she lost in illusions, she gained in unbreakable resilience. Standing up to powerful forces and calling out wrongdoing isn't easy, but it's sometimes the only way to protect your dignity and your future.